Hello.
Good
Good
morning.
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 How are y'all doing?
Very good.
Good. Good. Um,
Catch any good waves?
no, it's completely flat here right now, unfortunately. Yeah. Did you guys have a chance to jump in the tool since yesterday?
I did a little bit with the beast.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking at the reference beast. It's interesting.
In what ways is it
Actually,
interesting?
I think I found, I don't know if it's just me, but for example, when I was creating one of the flows on the tutorial videos that
Mhm.
we were supposed to go over, there was one where at the end the calculation had to be 35, and it wasn't when I added the property and everything was filled out right. I went over it many times. It just wasn't doing it. Like it
Mhm.
wasn't doing it until I deleted the property and then re-added it and redid it, and then it did the calculation. I don't know. I don't know if that's just something that's kind of known or my side or
Which flow would this have been, the erase flow or what?
no, it was both actually happened a couple of times in the credentials and the practice flow. Where at the property it says age in 5 years, person age plus 5.
Let's see. So practice flow one. Okay, so person plus age 5.
Yeah. And it wasn't making the calculation of the plus 5 until I actually deleted it and redid it again.
Interesting.
And it happened a couple of times with other flows.
Hmm. That's interesting. I'm wondering if I don't know. I'm looking at it and I can't think of, if
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
I'm being honest, I also didn't even know you could reference within within that group. So I actually didn't know that was a thing, but I guess it is. Um yeah, I don't know. But yeah, if you run into it again, let me know, and then I'll show you like how you could actually like send me like the flow definition and stuff like that
Ah,
today.
okay.
And like how you kind of like export flows really easily and things like that.
Yeah.
So, are there any other questions since yesterday?
No, not for me.
Not in my end.
Well,
Oh
actually
wait,
is
did sorry, Abel. Did it get brought up yet about our sandbox connection? I think that was the other question, is whether or not it's connected to our sandbox. It does not appear it is.
Oh, your iPass environment?
Correct.
yeah.
So that's something that we actually have to set up for
Okay.
it. I mean, we can set that up today if we wanted to. Just to kind of just so we have at least something in there.
Okay.
I'm looking to see. Okay, so it looks like we do have a tickets credential. It looks like there is something that is available for your
Yeah.
production account.
Yeah, that's for prod.
Yeah, and that's for like the round robin ticket
Yeah.
assignment. I mean,
Correct.
technically we could use that today, I think. Yeah, I mean, we could technically use that just for like examples today. And we would only do like the getting of information. We wouldn't do any like updating of information, also fully understanding that this is a production account.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, it is live and being used presently, so as long as we're making a copy and not messing with it to where it's going to impact our users.
Yeah, well, we wouldn't make any copies of anything. It would just like, so because today's sessions are the generalized expressions and then looping and iterating. Usually for like the
Okay.
looping and iterating stuff, I just like using data that we're all familiar with, like TDX stuff. And there's a call in there called get all tickets, which just allows me to list all the tickets that are in the environment as just like an easy way to do stuff. And then like you can see information that like, oh, like I know that ticket right there and stuff like that. Just for ease of use. So. But yeah. But so Sandbox, we're not connected to, but I mean we can set up that connection later on. Are there any other questions? Or comments, concerns?
That was it on my side.
Anybody else?
I think we're all good.
Awesome. Well, then we can go ahead and just jump right into it then for today. So let me get set up here and then I will share my screen. All right, can y'all see my my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. So so for today, the first thing that so like I said, today's session is going to be looping and iterating and then general expressions. So once again, I kind of want to introduce us back to the concept of the library, because the general expressions labs for today all are actually in the library, as well as the looping and iterating ones. And then with those, additionally, we can download them and then actually use them for, or like just kind of go through today's exercises and just kind of get familiar with the tool. So for us to download, we'll start with that general expressions one. If we go to the libraries dropdown and then go to the global community library, and then if we immediately we can have the ability to filter by type. If we filter by type of specifically application, you can see where we have these commonly used expressions lab right here. All I have to do is just simply click on import and then just open it after import. And then we can see where it brings in this the lab. So what I can do also, since I'm already on this screen, I'm going to go ahead and rename this to be, I could rename this to be like Andre commonly used expressions, just so then whenever we have these list of apps in there, we know whose is whose, and we can delete these apps later on too. Does anybody need me to go back over that again?
I think we're good.
Awesome. So, all right, so now let's go ahead and, so whenever on this screen, we can go ahead and jump into flows. And then here we can see that we have a bunch of different flows that that these are kind of like your exercises. Now, the first one I want to go through is just I just want to go through this first exercise right here, exercise 1, getting to know expressions. So whenever I click on this, it brings me into an already pre-built flow. Now, based on our conversations yesterday, pretty much everybody here has a good level of programming knowledge. Is that correct? I just want to confirm.
No, so at this point, because yesterday you just had majority of app services on at the beginning of the call. Today you have a mixture. So you have, I'd say half the room do have the programming background. The other half have either networking, server, or help desk background.
Okay, awesome. So then that'll help me as I'm just going through stuff. I'll explain certain things a little bit more in depth then. So
Perfect.
awesome. And then if anybody's ever confused at any point about anything that I'm saying, please feel free just to stop me and say, hey, can you please re-explain that or explain it differently? You are more than welcome to do that. Yeah. But jumping right into this, so this one, just this flow right here just kind of goes through a bunch of these like just generalized expressions that you can find. Now, just before we also get started, just so then we are all on the same page, I'm just going to kind of give you some terminology for whenever you hear me say different things throughout the tool, you'll know what I'm referring to. So this little box right here where you have like control, repeat, connectors, messaging, so on and so forth, I refer to this as specifically the flow build, like the flow toolbox or the flow builder toolbox. So you might hear me come in and say, hey, like look in the data section of the flow toolbox. So whenever you hear flow toolbox, that's what to think of. The next thing that you'll hear me use as a reference a lot is the term of design mode and test mode. So that's just simply referring to these two options right here. So in design mode, this is kind of meant just for designing, but whenever you flip it into test mode, then this is where you get your test actions so that you can start walking through the flow. Now, you can also make changes while you're in test mode, and a lot of the time whenever I'm building, I usually just kind of stay in test mode unless I need to add comments to stuff or be able to view the my clipboard and stuff like that. But most of the time, I'm usually just working in test mode. Some other things too that you'll also that are just going to be kind of really nice as you're building in iPass is if you go to the mountain icon. Now, I actually just learned that this is called the views menu, but I like to call it the mountain icon. If you hover over it, you'll get a drop down. At the very bottom, it says show test actions on the right. Whenever you uncheck that, it actually brings the test actions over to the left. So whenever you're dealing with these really long flows, it's just really easy to work with this stuff. This is like one of those things that I recommend that everybody do because it will make your life so much easier in the long run. Once again, that is the mountain icon, and then the very bottom, it's just that show test actions on the right. So now I already have my flow in test mode. I'm gonna go ahead and keep it there. Now, whenever you are in test mode, you do get these controls at the very top. Usually you'll kind of like, this is like go back a step, go forward a step. I think this is skip step. And then this is just kind of like play the flow. So to let the flow run through. And then this is reset the entire flow. So I can come in here and I reset the entire flow. And then these all reset. Now, as you're going through this, you'll also have just kind of like these icons right here as well. So on these controls right here, these are like individual step run thing items, this like little play button in the middle. And then the binoculars are specifically used after the step has already been run. So if I click on the binocular right now, I'm not going to get anything. But if I actually run the step and then I come back in here and click on the binoculars, then you can see where I do get that data back in present. It's just a nice way to go back and easily view that information that's in there. Two other terms you'll hear me say.
I have a question.
Yes.
In the output data, is there a way to search in there for like IDs and like attributes?
Right here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what you can do is just you can hit Control F and then you get a little finder. Right
Okay.
there. Yeah. But you have to be within the little menu right there.
Okay. Yeah, because I just tried Control F over the general thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then additionally too, just as like another quick tip for you. If you ever need to do like a find and replace, because this is the same JSON editor throughout, or like JSON viewer editor throughout the entire tool, it's the same like exact thing. If in some cases you might need to do like find and replace, if you hit Control H on your keyboard, then you get a find and replace option in these things. So just another like little quick tip for you. So awesome. So a couple other terms you'll hear me reference are, so whenever I'm actually clicking on like the white space, or like in this case with this properties are essentially just variables. Whenever I click on this property on the right-hand side of the equal sign, I get this little menu right here. These little blue icons, I refer to this as the data picker. So essentially this just allows me to pick data throughout the flow. You also have the expressions menu as well, or insert the expression component. I usually just refer to this as the green plus, keeping it easy and generic. And then you also have your ability to paste from your clipboard as well, easily. So, but usually you'll only ever hear me refer to like the data picker and then the green plus. Are there any questions so far?
No, Andre, but I think what could be helpful is if just initially, given our mix of audience today, if you can just say, what's the plan for today? What's the agenda we're going to go through today? And then that way, those that are listening can understand whether they need to be hands-on and be walking through it with you, or if they should just be listening to understand the functionality.
So for today,
Because we have people from every level of IT on this call. So
so for today's session, it's kind of up to you if you want to follow along with me. Right now, I'm just going to be kind of talking through some of these general expressions, giving you some tips associated with them. And then also additionally for the looping and iterating portions, once again, those are things that if you want to follow along, you are more than welcome to. Probably recommended that you do, just so you kind of get your clicks in, you get the muscle memory on how all things are. So not required, but definitely recommended. So yeah, so jumping right into things. So whenever I actually run step 2, and like I said, this is just going over the general expressions. So really, I only care about the stuff that's in here. So first things first, I want to go ahead and run step 2. Essentially, this just initializes a bunch of data within my right pane and then within the flow. Now, as I start to step down this flow, you can see that we have these expressions are grouped into different sections. So I have here text expressions, I have math expressions, I have logical expressions, date, time, and then also general expressions. I'm going to go ahead and scroll back up to the top and just kind of step through each one of these items. So for step 5, we have the concatenate expression. Essentially, what concatenating is whenever I have 2 pieces of text and I want to essentially just add one on to the end. So in this case, we have the phrase, I love to eat. And then in this section of it, it's referencing the variables of food. Now, the reason I know that is because it says variables and then where it says food right there. Essentially, the way to follow this paper trail is if I go find the option that says variables, which is this group right here, and then it goes to that property of food. So this is essentially the replacement of where it says corn dogs. So whenever I actually run step 5, we should expect it to output saying, I love to eat corn dogs. Now, additionally, within these concatenations, you have a little plus at the end of it. You can simply just click on that to keep adding more and more concatenations for stuff. So I could come in here and say, I love to eat, in this case, it would say corn dogs, and then I could add a lot, and then a couple exclamation points. So whenever I rerun this, then you can see where it modifies that text. The next expression that we have is the replace expression. The replace expression simply works as just a find and replace for data within the flow. So in this example, we're using replace the word corn with the word hot in, once again, that variable's reference to food. So in this case, instead of it saying corn dogs, we should now expect just the output to be hot dogs. So whenever I run this, it has that term hot dogs right there. Now, the reason why it didn't reference from where it said, I love to eat, in this case, back here in step 5, the reason why it didn't change I love to eat corn dogs a lot to be I love to eat hot dogs a lot is because this right here is still referencing the variable of food right here called corn dogs. If I wanted it to change it in here, what I could do is in that step 6, what I can do is I can pick on my little data picker. And then I can choose where my concatenate expression, because that's where I wanted to pull that data from. So whenever I choose my concatenate expression instead, and then I rerun step 6, then we can see where it ended up changing that same text, but from this string concatenation that we did earlier. Now, another thing you'll also see in a lot of steps, or you'll have these like little pop-out menus right here, or in some cases you have drop-downs. I always recommend clicking on these because they usually tend to give you a lot of options. And in some cases, some of these options aren't really necessary. But here you can see we get an options of just CI. Essentially, whenever I click this, you can have case insensitive and case sensitive commands for these different situations. So I could have made this case sensitive and then it wouldn't have done anything for it. But because it's case insensitive, it doesn't matter what's in that box. It'll just look for the word hot and then replace it with corn. Or my bad, it will replace the word corn with hot. So. Now, step 7, this expression, this is the part of expression. Essentially, this is really good for being able to extract certain parts of text. Now, one thing for the programmers out there, you'll notice that where it says part of the variables of food from 1 to 4. Now, programmers out there, you all are probably, or not probably, you all are very used to indexing a list or a string starting at index 0. I really hate to say this to you, but indexing an IPass actually starts at 1. So I'm sorry. I always have to rethink whenever I am actually in IPass and working that I have to use 1 for that index to start with. So, but whenever I run this, I should be able to get the phrase corn out of it from corn dogs, because those are the first 4 letters right there. Now, the next text expression is the trim expression. Now, you'll also notice on here that there is a drop down, and then on this trim expression, you can see where we also have a couple options like left trim, right trim, uppercase, lowercase, to and from base 64. Those are just other options that are available to you, but this right here is just going over the example of the trim expression. Now, for this, it's saying, oh, in this, it's asking what white spaces are removed in this sentence. Now, for those who are not familiar with what trimming of a string is, it removes white spaces from the front and the back, or the beginning and the end of our line of text. Now, if I wanted to only remove it from the front of it, then I would do a left trim. And if I only want to remove spaces from the end of it, then I would do a right trim. But whenever I run this, we can see that I should get all the white spaces removed at the beginning and the end of the sentence, but none in the middle. Now, this is where coming into this replace expression, you can actually replace anything that you want. So in this case, we are actually replacing, there's an empty space in this field, and we're actually replacing that space with absolutely nothing. So then whenever it comes in and asks which white spaces are removed in this sentence, whenever I run this, it actually gets rid of every single white space because we decided to remove all the spaces from it. Now, the next expression, this date as text expression. So for the programmers out there, we all know that working with dates is probably one of the worst things in the entire world. IPass makes it a little bit easier. If we already have one comment, dates are evil. Dates are one of the most horrendous things to work with. Date time formatting, horrible. So in this case, we have this date as text expression. So we're taking the variable of today's date, which if I scroll back up to the top, we have today's date. It references the term now, or the expression of now, which essentially just returns that current date and time. So whenever I run this, we can see that we get that date as a text object now. So we get 2023, April 21st, and then the current time. Now these times are also in UTC, just as a heads up. So whenever you're working with this, make sure that you are converting it accordingly. Now, one thing that's also really cool with IPass is we have this date as text expression, but we can have formatting with it. Now, within these dates as text expressions, you can see where we have these little pop-outs. Whenever I click the pop-out on step 11, you can see where we have this string of characters right here. Well, whenever I actually run step 11, we can see that it'll come in and change it to be Friday, April 21st, 2023. And that's because we added this text formatting. Now, I also know what a lot of you are probably thinking. How the heck do I remember these types of text formats for these different kinds of dates? I can tell you right now, I don't even remember them half the time. But whenever you're in the flow, you'll notice in some cases you get these like 3 black lines right here. Now, these things are absolutely amazing. The reason being is because whenever I actually click on them, it gives me, these are actually called lookups, it gives me a bunch of different options for various formats for certain things. So in this case, if I were to click on like short date, and then I rerun step 11, we can see now where it converts it to a short date. So this is what I mean by dates are a lot easier to manage with an IPass. Are there any questions based on just the text expressions so far? Is anyone completely lost?
Is there a need to manage the time zone? within the expressions in terms of date.
Like basically saying like, oh, I'm in this time zone, and then it converts it automatically.
Right.
So I haven't heard of any use cases for that or any roadmapped items for that, but that actually is a really, really good idea. So that's definitely something I'll write down and take back to our team. Any other questions?
Are there different language available, or is it primary English? Or I guess you have to write it in, let's say, Spanish or whatever.
So iPass is like a universal like language tool. Like for anything in these areas right here, you would have to write it in like Spanish or something like that. But I think for like where it says property, depending on like the environment that you have set up, it would come in Spanish.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. But changing it on your screen, I think you might be able to adjust that in user settings, I think.
Yeah, I think I was mostly focusing on the text within the.
Oh yeah, you could type these in
text.
Spanish. Yeah, these can be changed to whatever you want them to be.
Got it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so if you want it in Spanish, you would type it in Spanish.
Got it.
Yeah, but like all these things, like where it says part of, like that is by default. And then there, I think we can adjust some settings on a user's profile, and then it can adjust like that text and stuff like that. So,
Okay, thanks.
welcome. Anything else? I guess not, so we'll go ahead and move on. Now, the math expressions are usually pretty straightforward. But allows us, so we have a bunch of different expressions that we can utilize to do different math operations with. This just kind of goes through a couple different examples. So in this case, we have like multiplication. So we have the variable of number, and then we have a little drop down in the center where we can either add, subtract, multiply, divide. We can do exponents, or we can even get like remainders for certain things. So whenever I run step 14, we took the variable of number, which I believe if I scroll up to the top, it is 144. So 144 times 60 is 8,640. And then we can also do the same thing of division. So 144 divided by 4 is 36. Now this one does the remainder operation of it. So whenever we do 144 divided by 5, this will actually return us our remainder, which is we have a remainder of 4. Now, additionally, iPass is also aware of order of operations. So in this case, you can see where we have the variable number, which is 144 divided by 12 plus 2. In this case, we will get what am I trying to think of? We should get 14. So whenever I run step 17, we get 14. And then now this is 144 divided by, and then it's looking at the 12 plus 2. So whenever we run this, we get 10.2857. You also have another tool that has those little drop downs where you have other options, other operations. In this case, this is using square root, but you can also do absolute value, cosine, sine, exponents, natural logs, floors, negatives, rounding. You get a bunch of options. I mean, I've never heard of anybody using cosine, sine, or any of those values in iPass yet, but it's never too late to be the first.
Our students would use it inappropriately.
There you go. Yeah, so whenever you run that, then you get your square root of 144, in this case, 12. You also have a rounding expression. Now, some things to note about the rounding expression is this works like JavaScript rounding. So this has a little pop out in here that does have some stuff in here. We have this number of 8.675309 for those who get the reference. And then also we are saying to round it to two places. So we should get 8.67 or 8.68 in this case whenever I run this. Now, a lot of questions we get is like, what if I had, yep, Steven got it. A lot of people would ask like if I had like 12, like 0.00 in here, would it round it to like 10? Just like to the whole number. And the answer to that is no. This only rounds for decimal places specifically. And then additionally, the last thing for the math expressions is you do have a random number generator as well. This will generate a number between 0 and 1, and it just generates some random decimal place or decimal number. So you run this a couple times and then you have that. So whenever if you've had the chance of looking at like the rock, paper, scissors form that I made, that's in the global community library, I actually use the random functionality for the computer to say like, hey, if they choose like, and if the random number that was generated is anywhere between 0 and 0.33, then it's rock, and then 0.34 to whatever is paper, and then so on for scissors. So there are application uses for this.
Now, Andre, going back to the rounding, so let's say we do have them enter a decimal, we want it to round to a whole number. How would we accomplish that?
So for something like that, we would have to use a script step to round to that whole number. I think we might be able to also just say round to 0 places, and then it would do that. Yep.
Oh, okay, cool.
Okay, yeah. So, but like if this were to say like if it was just like 19 or something like that, and you wanted to round to 20, like that, you would have to use like some custom scripting for.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Any other questions on the math operations? Not hearing anything, so we will continue to move on. I'm gonna go ahead and minimize a couple of these things just so whenever I scroll up, it's easier. And then also, so you'll see certain sections where you have like pluses and minuses for stuff. That's just an easy way that you can like collapse a bunch of stuff as well. Now, what these are, so this is the logical expressions section. So logical expressions are essentially, for those who don't know, they are an expression that will return either a value of true or false. Now, one thing you'll immediately notice about all these logical expressions is the shape of them specifically. So in this case, these are all hexagonal shapes, where all the other expressions are all rounded shapes. So if I come in here and I open this up, these are all rounded. And then even if I open up those text ones, they are all also rounded. So that just kind of gives you like just a clear visual of like an immediate visual of what is an expression, or what is a logical expression versus what is like more like an operator expression. So, but these logical expressions, like I said, will only return true or false based on the information that's provided in them. So in this case, we have the number 3 is greater than 5. That's the expression that we have. In this case, we all know that 3 is not going to be greater than 5. So we know that this will return false because it is incorrect. So whenever I run this, we can see that it does in fact return false. We also have the ability to do text comparisons as well. So I have this text comparison right here. So we have the variables food is equal to hot dogs. Now, this is once again, we are asking if it is. In this case, though, the variables of food is actually corn dog. So we can also expect this to come back as false. So whenever I run step 25, it also does come back as false. Now, we also have in these text comparisons, we also have little drop downs associated with them. In this case, this is actually referencing the contains operation for text comparison. So whenever I actually do the contains, in this case, we're asking, does the variable's food contain the word dog? In this case, it does, because the variable's food, once again, is corn dogs. So we can see that that does now come back and evaluate as true. Now, just out of curiosity for everybody, does everyone here know about and or statements? Just if you don't know, drop in the chat saying I have no idea or no. It's okay. Nobody will judge you if you don't know. it's all good. Alright, well, it seems like everybody's familiar with them. So with everybody being familiar with and or statements, just like the high level overview, we all know that with an and statement, both sides of your and both need to be true for the entire expression to be evaluated as true. So in this case, in this example, we can see that we have the expression of 3 being greater than 5 and the variables of food containing the word dog. So we know that this part, the variables food containing dog, is in fact true. However, the 3 being greater than 5 is in fact false, but because these are in between an and, this will actually evaluate as false because both of them are, or because one of them is false. Both need to be true for an and statement. The or expression, in this case, we have 3 is equal to 5, or the variables food contains the word dog. The right hand we know to be true, the left hand we definitely know to be false, but because it's in between an or statement, we know that this will evaluate to be as true because its ors only look for one of those items to be true. So I can go ahead and run this, and then we have it come out as true. We also have a not expression as well, which just essentially reverses everything. So in this case, we have, in this case, we know that text variable, the variables food contains the word dog. We know this part to be true, this inside section. However, this outside section, since it's a not, it's actually going to turn this around to be false. Now, I usually recommend people not use not statements, more or less just for readability. But the time that I do use not statements is checking if things are, if something is not null, essentially. So checking to see if essentially an item has a value inside of it. Now, the way that I would go about doing that, and this isn't one of those ones that's already pre-done in here, but if I wanted to add that in here, under this data dropdown in our flow toolbox, we have our property right here. I'm just going to click and drag our property over. And then you should get some name. I'll come in here, I'll rename this, and I'll rename this to be check if null, if not null. And then I can start piecing together my expression. So my first expression that I'll want to grab is my not expression from my little green plus or my expression adder. So I can scroll down here and I just simply look for my not expression. So I'll go ahead and add that. And then we can see that there's a hexagonal shape within not, which lets me know that I need to put another expression in here. In this case, I can now look for my is null expression and that, or my is null expression / operator. So if I scroll down, and this one is usually closer to the bottom, I have my is null expression right here. I can click on that and then it automatically will nest it inside that not statement. And then what I can do is I can come in here and I can pick something to see if it's null or not. So in this case, I'll just choose food, for example, which we know has a value in it. So this should also come back to be true because it is in fact not null. Any questions on the logical expressions?
Not at the moment.
Awesome. So we'll go ahead and keep on moving down. So the next one, once again, like I said, we all know that dates are evil, but IPass likes to make them a little bit easier. So here we have our now expressions. So these are just some date and time expressions in IPass. So whenever I run step 33, that now expression, it gets me that current date and time right now, which is this, and it should be readjusted a little bit from the first one that we did. We also have a get in date expression. So I can actually get the year of a date, or in this case, because I have those 3 little black bars, I can choose any one of these options, the day of the week of the year, the day of the year, so on and so forth, for the specific of today's date. So if I run this, we can see that we get the year 2023. We also have an add to date expression. So sometimes you want to check for like things like 3 days out, or in this case, or you could also do, I think you could do, year, month, day, hour, minute, second, millisecond. And then in this case, whenever I add 3 to this, it brings us to the 24th, which is 3 days from now. One thing that's also really cool is you can actually go negative days as well. So let's say I wanted to go negative, we'll say 36 or 26 days. Whenever I run this now, we can see where it brings us back to March 26th. So this add to date expression absolutely rocks for saving stuff. Now, one other thing you might be wondering is, well, okay, so you showed us that date or the date as text expression from earlier. How would I go about converting this date right here? Well, you could simply add another step and reference it, or you could actually just nest it within that other that date as text expression. Now, just to kind of walk through doing that, if I click on this green plus and I look for that date as text expression, and the reason I know which one it is because, well, it's in this as text right here. But you can see we have a couple of things that say as text. One of the things you'll commonly see throughout these expressions is the white space and what the symbols are that they contain. In this case, this is containing the pound sign or a number symbol. So we know that this is a number as text, where this one contains a calendar, which lets me know it's a date as text. So whenever I click on this, it surrounds it in my date as text. Now it nested it. And then I can come through and I can pick out my specific format that I want. So I can pick, we'll do a long date. And then whenever I actually run this on step 35 again, we can see now where I get that long date of what 26 days ago was. So you can nest these expressions pretty deeply. And I mean, I've seen some pretty crazy ones before. So also in cases where your expressions get really long and it makes your flow really long, if you ever want to minimize a really long expression, all you have to do is just somewhere on the expression, on the outside one, double click on it, and then it'll minimize it really small for you. And if you want to reopen it, you just hover and then click on it or double click on it again, and then it'll hide it for you. So. Now, also you have a custom date expression as well. So in this case, on step 36, we can create a custom date and it'll fill in all it will fill in everything else for us automatically associated with it. You also have a time between expression. So I could say like time between two specific dates, in this case in days. And then whenever I run step 37, we can see that we had 475 days since this. So. Any questions about the data expressions?
I know, Andre, when I run them, I run the property now expression and then it's returning the appropriate date, which is today. But then when I run the second one in the exercise, getting the year of the date, it's giving me one. It's saying it's year one.
It's giving you year one?
If I run it just as imported.
Okay. So like just to kind of walk you through like troubleshooting for stuff like this. So the first thing I would probably want to try, just to make sure that it's not something wrong with the control itself, is change it to be like month or something like that, and see if that does the trick. And so change it to be month and then rerun it.
Yeah, month says 1 as well.
Okay, so we know that it's not associated with the left half. So we know it's actually going to be associated with the right half. So one thing that I want you to do is if you scroll up to the top, so because this is referencing the variables of today's date, scroll up to the top and I want you just to rerun that second step. And also you should have today's date is equal to now in that property field.
Perfect. Okay.
Yep. So rerun it and then now scroll back down and then rerun step 35 or no, 34, my bad, or whichever one that one was.
That fixed it.
There you go. So more than likely what it was just something didn't get fully run within the singular step. So then it didn't know like, hey, like this was pulling in that current date and time. So oftentimes too, so anytime you make changes to like things up here, you actually have to rerun it. So like if I said like now, and then I added, I'm just going to do like an example of like now plus like, or like the date, add something to date. So add, I'll say like 5 years. Oh, nope. Add 5. Oh gosh. I don't know what just happened. Add 5 to the year of date now, of today's date. So notice that I just made the modification here. If I tried to go back in and run the get year method right here, I should still get 2023. The reason being is all because I made the change right here, I didn't reinstantiate the data associated with it. So to do that, I simply just have to run step 2 again. and then it re-evaluated my date. And then now whenever I come down and I rerun that step where it's getting that year, we can see now where it does in fact make those changes. So that's also one thing to note is whenever like changes are made, it's always good to rerun it and then you're good to go down below.
Got it. Makes
Mhm.
sense.
So because essentially what it'll do is it'll hold this current data right here in like, it's like the flow's memory, if you will. And then as you go down, like it won't make changes until you rerun it. So yeah. Any other questions? Not hearing it.
No,
So
yeah, no other questions at the end. It's just because we have additional people in the call, just so, to lay a little bit more foundational to understand why does this matter. These are the flows tied to, let's say, a ticket, for example. When a ticket comes in, if you want the to then be analyzed and have these various steps applied to that data, and then whether you're wanting it to update the ticket or send that data elsewhere, this is how we would accomplish that with these flows. And he's just showing us some basic functions within those flows itself, if that's helpful.
yeah. So moving on farther down, we have the general expressions. Now we call these ones just general expressions because they don't necessarily fit in any specific category, but they're very just generalized options out there. Now for the programmers out there, these will make a lot of sense to you. And for the other people, I will do my best at explaining them so then they make sense. So starting at step 40, we have the length of expression. Now, in programming, we have the ability to either take the length of a list or the length of a string. In this case, you have both of them. So in this case, this is passing through the length of a list, and our list being Mario characters. So whenever I run step 40, we can see that we get 5. Now, if I scroll back up where we have that list of Mario characters, we can see that we have 5 characters in here. And then we have the length of a word. So step 41, we're referencing once again that variables of food. If I go ahead and run this, we can see that we get 8 because there are 8 letters in this specific variable. So length of is just, it's the length of whatever you put in for this item right here. Now, the next 2 expressions are probably some of the most useful expressions I have ever used. We have the find in expression and the get in expression. What the find in expression specifically does is it will return me an index of something that matches a specific condition that I give it. So essentially what it's saying is find in, and then we provide what we're actually looking in. In this case, we're doing the variables of backyard baseball stats, which is this table or JSON array right here. So we can see where it has a couple of different rows as rows 1 through 4. And then each one of those rows has its own index. Well, whenever I do this find in backyard baseball stats, where the name, so there's a property of name in that backyard baseball stats, where that property name is equal to Keisha Phillips. So whenever I actually go through here and I click through this, we can see that Keisha Phillips' name is on the 3rd row of this table. So whenever I run step 42, I should expect to get back 3, which is correct, because once again, find in specifically returns me the index of the item in that list or object. A couple things to note about find in. Let's say that Keisha Phillips didn't exist in there, or whatever we're finding for didn't exist. If it does not exist, then it will return a -1, which then you can also check for error handling to see if something was actually found. Additionally, too, let's say that Keisha Phillips's name came through, was also on the next page as well, was also on the 4th or that 4th row as well, for some reason. This will still only ever return the value of 3 because it's only going to ever return the first occurrence of the of whatever that our condition of that where statement of that we're looking for in there. It will only ever return that first occurrence. So even if it popped up 20 times in that list, it will only ever return that first time it saw it. Also, too, if you're still a little confused on that find in expression, so under in your flow toolbox, under that general expressions dropdown, you also, if you scroll down, you have find in. Now, if you hover over stuff, you notice that you get a little blue question mark in the upper left of the control. You can actually click on that, and then it will give you just a quick summary of what the expression is and what it does as well. Now, the next expression is really, really cool as well. It's very similar to the find in expression. However, the get in expression can actually return me the value of something within the table at under that specific where condition. So where the find in returns me an index, this will actually return me a specific property or a value of something that I specify. So in this case, we're saying get in backyard baseball stats, the property of name, where this is our condition, where that property of nickname in that table is equal to secret weapon. So if I scroll back up here, we can see that in this case we're already on the nickname of secret weapon, and we're asking for that name attribute, which is going to be in this case Pablo Sanchez. So whenever I run step 43, we can see that we in fact get that back. Like the find in step, this will only ever return the first occurrence of it. So whenever you're doing these types of things, whenever you're using these steps, whatever we do in this where statement right here, we have to make sure that we're keying off of something that we know is going to be unique, like email addresses, some sort of like an ID or something like that. That's where we want to key off of these things. The next expression is our index of expression. Essentially what this is, it's very similar to the find in expression. However, we're not actually like looking for where something is. In this case, our index of is really good for just a plain list, because I can say like, hey, what's the index of, in this case, of the Mario character of Waluigi in that list of Mario characters of Waluigi. So if I look at this in this list, remembering that indexing and IPath starts at 1, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we should actually get a 4 back for this whenever I run step 44, which we do. Now, the last one that the second to last one we have is the when expression. Now, essentially what the when expression does is it allows us to have like a miniature if statement within the within a property for helping us to set the value of a property dynamically. Now, in this case, I have the variable of when it's raining, it's saying better bring an umbrella. If it's not raining, then sun's out, guns out. Now, if I scroll back up to the top, we can see that our variable of it's raining is equal to false. Now, normally for, before I get into that, so whenever I run step 45, because this is false right here, I should get sun's out, guns out as my response. Now, normally, whenever I am building out when statements, you could easily do this, how it's like how I have the false above, and then I just reference it further down below. Usually for my best practice, though, that whenever I set these things up, I like to use the different comparisons that I have, or like my logical expressions to build these things out. So in this case, I could use my text expression, and then on my left side, I could reference when it's raining, or that variable of it's raining in that variable section. So it's raining. And then I can say whenever it's equal to true. So if I scroll down and I find our true statement right here. So when it's raining is equal to true, then it would say better bring an umbrella, else it should be sun's out, guns out. And then whenever it runs, we can still see that nothing changed. But this just gives you it makes readability a lot easier for it. Now with a when expression, you also have additional like pluses where you can add further when expressions, and then you could add as many as you want to evaluate and dynamically set the value of a specific property. Now, just like the get in and the find in, this will specifically stop evaluating at the first true statement. So in this case, there were no true statements, so it went to the sun's out, guns out. But if like if this first when statement was true, but also the next one was also true, it's going to stop right here and return whatever was in that second option, not the third one. So Any questions on that when expression? That one's usually a little confusing.
I think we're good.
Awesome. And then the last one is just a simple contains expression. Essentially, well, one thing you'll immediately notice is that this is in our hexagonal shape. So we're just checking to see, hey, like, does this, or this is going to return true or false because it's a hexagon. And we're going to see, okay, does, in this case, the list of Mario characters contain the character of Princess Peach? Now, without scrolling up, I already know that it doesn't, so we should actually have this expect to be returned as false. Those are just some base general expressions for you all. There's definitely a couple more or within these fields, but like I said, whenever you hover over these things, you do get the option of the little help text, and then it helps you do this, or it helps you generate those just like little help blurbs to say, like, to know like what these things all are. So are there any questions on general expressions, just kind of like the flow building processes, or like the or yeah, just any general questions?
I apologize if you mentioned it, but is there something like a case statement where you can use a variable to identify different cases of that
Yeah,
variable?
so that's not going to be in any one of these like expressions right here. What this is going to be is under this control section. If I click that drop down, then you have your if and then your like switch statement right here. So I could drag my switch statement down, and then there you go.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions?
So going back to the math expressions on the round, is there a round up or round down?
No, there is not.
And he says you have to do that with scripting.
Mhm.
Okay.
You want to show real quick, Andre, that script? I saw it, how you would drag and drop that over and use it.
Yeah, so the way I would go about doing something like that, and I'll take you through my entire process of how I would probably go about doing this. So if I go to that math expression, and then so the way I would go about doing this is under that other section, I have this script option right here. And then I would come in and say, so you were specifically asking, rounding it to, say it one more time.
Let's say round up to two decimals.
Okay, so no matter what it is, just round, like even if it's at 8.4, we're going to round up to 9, correct?
Well, if it's, for example, 8.34 rounded to 8.40, for example.
Oh, okay. So the way that I would do something like that is through the script step. Now, one thing about the script step is anything I put in here, or any of my variables that are within my flow, I can actually reference within my script step. Now, one of the best practices that I do is rather than like there being spaces in here, usually what I'll do is if I'm going to reference something in the script step, I'll come in here and I'll call, like, I'll do something with no spaces, or I'll call this one like round number or something like that. And then I can come into my script right here. Now, this is just JavaScript, but I could come in and say var number is equal to round number. And then for doing this, the way that I would probably go about, or at least my thought process for going about this, is I would simply just go to a beautiful website called ChatGPT, and then say, write me some JS for rounding 8.34 to be 8.4. So round up. And then, so this is what, this is essentially what it gave me right here. So where we had like let num is equal to this is essentially our variable that we did. But I would come back in here, I could put this to say, okay, so let number rounded numbers. So then I could say this, swap it around, just those variables. And then I could output my option of num. Let's see. Or yep, num. And then I believe that was correct. I'm just going to verify that. Oh wait, nope, that should have been number. And then, yep, and then I can, and this should also be number. So then whenever I do my save changes, and then I run this script step, and then for some reason I lost my side nav. Now, whenever I run the script step, we should see, well, okay, in this case, it gave me 8, 9, but, oh, that's weird. I randomly got logged out, bear with me. Probably had it open on another tab and it logged me out, but that's how you could go about doing it. So it's pulling in the actual number of rounded number, that variable reference, and then you would just have to write your appropriate script to do it, which I know JavaScript, but I know it well. I know ChatGPT well enough where it can write me some good JavaScript.
Right, that's the way to go.
Yeah. Yeah, but does that help you out?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Now, like I love using script steps for a bunch of different things. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with like Active Directories, like on-prem. Whenever you like do a get user, it does like a list of like name, value, attributes essentially. Rather than having it as like key value pairs. I had ChatGPT write me some JavaScript to like convert that over essentially, which was really sweet. So, but yeah, this script step is very, very powerful if you need it. So. Any other questions? Guess not. Let's see. So I will leave it up to you all if we want to take like a quick 5-minute break before we jump into the next stuff, or we can just kind of jump straight into it.
What do you guys all want to do? I'm fine to just keep going. It looks like we're scheduled for 1 more hour and that's it. And then we'll be done.
Mm-hmm.
We can keep going for me.
Cool. Knock it out.
Awesome. So this is your general expressions lab. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back into flows. So the next section we're going to get into is this looping and iterating of data and how we actually do that specifically within iPass. And it just kind of helps us to use a couple more of those different, couple more items out of that toolbox. Now, just so then I can assess everybody's just knowledge in programming and these terms, how familiar is everyone with looping of data? Just like drop either like I'm good or not really. Just drop that in the chat just so then I know what terminology I can use. So everyone says we're good, then okay, so we got thumbs ups. We got 2 people saying I'm good. We got either slow typers or people falling asleep. All right, so I see a couple more goods. So I'm missing a couple. Just want to get my like low, just get like the universal knowledge. All right. So from what it seems like, everyone is pretty much good with like looping of data within just programming in general. So in programming, we all know that we have 3 different kinds of loops. We have a for loop, a for each loop, and a while loop. You have all of those to your advantage in iPass. So the first thing I want to go ahead and do is we're actually going to go in and create some new flows. So in order to create a new flow, if you all haven't done this yet already, whenever I'm in my list of flows right here, I can simply just create a new flow by clicking on this add button. And then I can add a new flow. Now, the first flow I want to start off with is the for each loop. So I'm gonna call this one just for each loop. And then I want to go ahead and click enter. And then it brings me to a empty flow, just outlined for me. Now, like I said, for this one, I actually wanted to use some data associated with it that you all are familiar with, so then we can actually have some stuff to loop and iterate through. Now, the way that we're going to do this, and like we said earlier, this is all production live data, so please be very careful. Please, if you are following along, please listen very closely. If you get lost, don't hesitate to ask me to go back over anything. Under this connectors and messaging dropdown, we have this connect to option. So this helps us to reference connectors within the system. So whenever I bring this connect to dropdown over, in this case, I'm only shown 2 connectors because these are the only 2 that we have in our system. What we are going to do is go ahead and just grab this TDX tickets connector. And then what we're going to do is under this actions dropdown, I want us to search for a very specific action. I want us to search for get all tickets. And we should see where we have that option for get all tickets. I want everyone to just go ahead and click on that. And once again, we are using that TDX tickets connector, and we are using the get all tickets action. Now, one thing you'll notice is we get this stuff for input. Essentially, what input allows us to do, these are the things that need to go as inputs to our API endpoint. So in this case, our endpoint is only asking us for the app ID. Now, in this case, since I don't have access to your environment, I have no idea what your app ID is. But fortunately enough, the developers of iPass are smart enough to think of a solution for that. So one thing you'll notice, kind of like how in those expressions, we have these 3 little black bars right here. Whenever I click on this, what it does is it's doing something called an active lookup. Now there's a credential associated with this, and then what it's doing is it's finding all the application IDs out there. Now, Melody, just as a quick question, what application would you prefer us all to use?
Well, the round robin one that I think you wanted to play with, that's in the maintenance and operations application.
Okay.
That's what you're wanting to pull in.
Well, I'm not necessarily wanting to pull that information in, but like I was just thinking like a generalized ticketing app that everyone can see from. So, but if we're going to do that one, then that's perfect. So pulling in the maintenance and operations ticket app IDs. So essentially what it's doing is it says maintenance and operations to me, but internally it's actually storing the ID of that application. So once I do this, I can go and click save changes. And then I can I can throw my flow in test mode. And then whenever I run step 2, it'll go through, it's reaching out, it's doing its connector. We'll see that I, in fact, get a response back of all of the tickets that are currently in that application, that get all tickets call. So now let's say that I wanted to loop through all of this data. Once again, we're doing the for each loop. Now, for those who might not be familiar, for each loops essentially they loop through absolutely everything in this entire list, no matter how long it is. Now, the way that we go about using our for each loop is in our flow toolbox, we have the repeat section. In that repeat dropdown, these are our different loops. And then I can go ahead and I can see my for each loop. I can just click and drag it over. Now, one thing you'll immediately notice is where it says for each, and then it says F102 in, and then just empty space. So whenever you have for each loops, you usually would say like for each item or for each for each, you could say ticket, so on and so forth, essentially just a reference point of each of the items you're looping through. So in this case, I could say for each, I'll call this one like ticket. Or actually, I'm going to call it item. And then I need to say like where I'm actually looping through data from. So in this case, I have my little blue data picker. In this case, I'm wanting to do it from the array of response, because response is an array right here. So I can choose response in this. So now it's going to look and say, okay, so for each item in response, whatever I put in this for each loop, I want to do stuff with that. So what I can do, and we'll just, let's pull, let me see, something where I could just grab something. I'll just pull out the ticket title, for example. So the way that I would go about, like if I just wanted to see the ticket title out of everything here. So if I go to that data drop down and then I grab a property step and then I just drag it in that for each loop. And I can rename this property to be ticket title. And then I can set it to be equal to, and whenever I set it to be equal to something, you'll notice that I get two options right here. And I get this item option drop down as well as this TDX tickets get all tickets drop down. This item drop down is specifically referencing the item that's currently in that loop. So anytime I use that for each loop, I want to utilize that whatever I put in here is drop down, and then I can get whatever I want. Now, in this case, I wanted to, like I said, I want to get title, which is at the bottom. You also have a search filter at the top that you can use. But I'll go ahead and grab title. And then it puts it in there and we can see where it says item title. Now, where if I were to change this for whatever reason, like if I wanted to say like, oh, actually I want to call it ticket because that makes more sense associated with this, it automatically makes those changes for you as you're using the flow. You don't have to go back in and then rework it. But now if I go ahead and keep on, so if I restart this flow and I start stepping through it, I'm going to just let it play automatically. It's doing our call. Now it's doing our for each loop. So now it grabbed our first ticket title. Now, if I keep on stepping through this, it'll grab our next one, in this case, the library staff lounge. And then it's just looping through each one of those ticket titles that is in that long list of responsive tickets. So now this is where you can come in and you could do all of your other operations that you need to do for various things like resetting like start dates. Like if you want to add 5 days to the start date, you could easily do that through here, or adding 5 days to the end date from today or something like that. Like you can go through and do all those things, and then you would come back in and make your call to make the update to the ticket. So now, one thing you'll also notice, and this is also on the for loop as well, is whenever I'm actually hovering over where it says for each loop, you can see where I get this like little pop out right here. This is probably going to be your greatest friend, especially whenever you're dealing with large sets of data that you have to loop through. You get this where statement right here. Essentially what this does is this is kind of like an active filter for stuff. So I could come in and say, hey, I actually only want to loop through tickets where maybe the requester's first name is Rhonda right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in and copy that and just Control-C it for that name. And I'm going to start creating a condition or that logical expression in that where statement. So if I go in and add that here, and I want to use my text expression, and now I want to look for that requester first name attribute because that's going to be the left side of this where statement. So under that ticket dropdown, I want to look for where it says requester first name. In this case, I'm just going to search for it though. So we get requester, I believe this is first name. Nope, that was requester email. Requester first name. And then I want to say where it's equal to Rhonda. So now whenever I actually start looping through this data, it's going to ignore everything else except for where the ticket's first name is equal to Rhonda. So right now I'm searching on my tickets. I got them back. Now, whenever I do my first for each loop, we can see that if I scroll down here, we can see that where our requester's first name is Rhonda, we'll loop through this. And then we got another one from her. Here's our second ticket that is from Rhonda. And then if I go ahead and run this one, then we can see where that one is a different title. So the where statements are absolutely awesome for using these for loops and for each loops. Any questions on that? Doesn't look like it. Am I boring anybody to death? Is anybody just like, oh, I already know this stuff? Just tell me more.
Actually learning a lot.
It's fun.
Awesome. So that's the for each loop for you. The next one I want to go through is the for loop. So under that applications dropdown, one thing you'll notice is you get recent flows, but also recently used applications. So I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to go in and click on this recent application, the one that I'm using right here. Just kind of gets me back out to this screen really, really quickly. I'm gonna go ahead and add another loop in here. I'm gonna call this one the for each loop, or the not the for each loop, we just did that one, the for loop, because that's the other loop that we have. And then what I want to do is I want to do the exact same thing as what I did before with getting all those tickets from that specific action in that connector. So in this connector is a messaging dropdown. I want to grab my connect to step. And then once again, I'm going to grab my TDX tickets. And then I'm going to do the action of get all tickets. And then I'm going to supply it with the app ID that I need. In this case, it was the maintenance and operations. And I'll do save changes. And I'll throw this flow in test mode just to go ahead and make sure that I am in fact getting data back, which I am. So the for each loop that we just went over, that goes through absolutely everything in the in that list of data that we get back, or the array of data that we get back. The difference between the for loop and the for each loop is in the for loop, I can actually say, hey, let's only grab items 10 through 15 or something like that. So if I go into the into my repeat section, I have my for loop right here. Now you'll notice that I do have the, in this case, for F102, I still can provide that name. In this case, I'll provide like item. And then I have from begin to end. This is where I can say, hey, let's only grab like a specific number of items, maybe like from items 10 to 15. Now what this is going to say is it's going to go through this entire list. It's going to grab the 10th item out of that list and then give me that data back. And it'll only go to item 15. So it's only going to go through it 5 separate times, but it's going to grab specifically that items 10 through 15. So the way now, what's different also about referencing items within my for loop is if I go to that data dropdown and then I grab a property in this case, well, I want to do the ticket title again. Okay, ticket title. And then I go to my blue data picker, you'll notice that item is no longer a dropdown anymore. Because in a for loop, these are actually returning an index value specifically. So item is not necessarily the entire piece right here. This is actually an index value. So in this case, I want to reference it from directly from that connector and response that get all tickets. And then I want to look for where it says title. And then you can see where item is populated in here. Now, the reason why item is populated in here is because let's say I added another property. I'm not going to rename this to be anything, but I wanted to grab ticket title out of here. You see how there's that empty row right there? It's asking us like it's saying like, hey, fill in a row right here. Well, without nothing filled in there, or without anything filled in there, we don't get anything back. The row is essentially saying, hey, like what index are we looking at? So I could come in here, I could say like 12, and then it'll get me back that 12th item right there. Or that 12th tickets title right there. So that's what item is essentially acting as. It's acting like it's me manually putting in 12, or in this case, 10 through 15, but it does it in that loop fashion for me. So now whenever I start stepping through this loop, instead of it being that object, it's now just the number 10. And then it'll give me that 10th title. Now we're at 11, it'll give me that 11th title. And then now we're at 12, so now we should get that 12th title right there, that library spell cleanup, please. So a lot of times people ask, like, when should I use a for loop versus a for each loop? It really just, I always kind of say it comes down to personal preference. I usually like the for each loop personally, just because I get a little bit more functionality of it. But there have been a couple of cases where the for loop was actually required for the action I was trying to accomplish. So, and then also just like the for each loop, you do get the little where out pop out where you can create that that like filter for it, that active filter. So. Any questions on the for loop? Not hearing anything. So we'll go ahead and jump right into the last one then, which is the while loop. So once again, gonna create my new flow and call this one while loop. Now, in my personal opinion, while loop was always the one that I struggled to fully understand. Just out of curiosity, is everyone familiar and has used while loops, or is there anybody that's like, I have used them, but am still not too familiar with the concepts of them? I just want to just get a double check. Use them.
I'm actually not familiar with it, although I've heard of
Okay.
them.
Okay, awesome. Use them and understands them. Okay, perfect. So we'll do the whole overview of what a while loop is. So the best way to think of a while loop is using it's basically like while something is happening, do this specific action. Now, a really easy comparison to make this to is think of it as like while my foot is, so like I'm driving, while my foot is pressed on the accelerator. So my condition is my foot pressed on the accelerator? In this case, it is. So while my foot is pressed on the accelerator, the car accelerates. However, and that's a constant while loop. So as long as my foot is pressed on that accelerator, we are accelerating. However, the condition that would break it is, so if I lift my foot off the accelerator, then I stop accelerating. It's kind of how a while loop works, is as long as the condition is valid, then it will continue evaluating a certain, or it will keep evaluating under a loop for different things. Now, a lot of times people also ask, well, when do you use while loops in iPass? Well, once again, it kind of comes down to personal preference. In some cases, I know people who will use while loops over for loops, but in some cases, it is better to use a while loop than a for loop. Now, one easy example of this is, and this one actually we won't get involved in a connector with, but if I go to this other dropdown, and then I have my options for snippets. Snippets are essentially just an easy way to grab in like a little block, a couple little blocks of stuff, or a couple little blocks of iPass steps. And the snippet I'm going to show you is one I use actually quite frequently. So whenever I drop snippet, it brings me up to this like little insert flow snippet menu. If you're following along with me on that, in this library section right here, choose it to say the global community library. And then you get a couple of these little options right here. These are just kind of like small, like in this case, like replace escaped HTML and text, or checking if property or object exists. Like these are just little snippets that you can use for whenever you just need to insert something really quickly. In this case, I am choosing the Active Directory paging the for loop the for each loop option. Now, this actually does use a while loop associated with it. Whenever I go in and click on insert, you can see that we have this while loop right here that gets created, or this while loop, and then this for each loop right here that gets created. Now, the things that will go on with the while loop, just to kind of walk through this. So in this case, I would actually call this, like I would call continue. I wouldn't have this to be 1. I would probably change this to be true. And then I would change this to also say while continue is equal to true. And then this would be setting continue to be false. This just kind of helps it read a little bit easier. So essentially how this reads, so if you're not familiar with Active Directory and using Active Directories, like searches, things like that, Active Directory has something which we refer to as paging values. Essentially what paging values means is that, let's say we had 80,000 users in Active Directory. If we tried to return all 80,000 users at a singular time, it would take probably about 15 years. And because it's so much data that's being returned. However, because of Active Directory's paging, I can say, hey, return me a list of maybe 20 users or something like that. And then let's only do it on page 1. It's kind of like whenever you're filtering through Google search pages, it's not going to return you all 2.4 million results that it found on one singular page. It's going to give you an option to have to click through multiple pages. Essentially, we can do that within APIs. We can say, hey, only return me this first page, the second page, so on and so forth. But let's say we have the situations where we don't know when there is an end to the page, we don't know when the last page is. So we can use a while loop to say, hey, just keep going until we figure out when the last page is. So to kind of walk through how this works is, so we have this property of continue, which is equal to true. Continue means we'll just continue going through our loop. And then we're starting at page 1. Now, whenever I jump into the while loop, we're going to say, okay, so while continue is equal to be true, which in this case it is, we're going to start doing our loop. Now, in this case, the first thing in this loop is going to be this active directory search. Now, active directory search will contain like where I can input a page number and then a page size. But since we don't have it in there, that I'm not going to open it because it'll ask me to try to create it. And I'm just not going to sweat that right now. But what it's going to say is, so anytime you have a while loop, we obviously, it does it based off of a condition, but we need to have another condition within the while loop to say, hey, whenever we're, like, we need to know like when to actually break the while loop, because you've probably heard the term infinite loops before. That's essentially a while loop that just keeps going. It never found an end, which means it runs to infinity. That's why we call them an infinite loop, because it never had a way to stop. So kind of reading down through this, we do our active directory search. Now we have an if statement that says if the length of whatever our search results is less than 2, then we want to set continue to be false. If it's not true, meaning that there are more than 2 items that are being returned, then we want to set our page equal to whatever it is plus 1. So then it would bring it to 2. Now, the reason why we do this is because I've had situations in Active Directory where I've had to iterate through 878 pages. I didn't know that it had 878 pages, but because of a while loop, essentially it just looped all through that information for me. So in this case, we'd go through, we'd do our search, we have more than 2 results, so then we have our page equals to page plus 1, which then this would be internally stored as 2. And then we would do all of our data manipulation down here. But then once we're done with that data manipulation, it'll come back up and say, okay, so continue is still equal to be true. Let's do another search again. And then it will evaluate under it being page 2. But then on page 2, we say, okay, we didn't actually have anything returned for some reason. So now what we can do is we can set continue to be false. And then it'll do whatever data manipulation, if there is any that needs to be done, it will do that. It'll come back up and say, hey, wait, continue is actually false right here, stored internally. Let's escape the while loop and then continue doing stuff down below, down here. So that's what it's going to be doing for those while loops. We have that condition. We need to have a situation where we can break the condition, and then it will do everything we need it to do up until that specific point. So that's your while loop for you. Any questions? There's no questions. That's all I had for today. So, thank you for everyone who came here today. Appreciate it. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend.
Andre, but I do have a question, because I don't like that we're connected to production. I mean, can we set it up in a sandbox so then that way when those that are going to be working with flows and building flows, they can do that against the sandbox environment initially?
Yeah, so what we can do is we can actually just easily replicate this. So let's copy this. We'll change this to be sandbox. Then I need to change our URL that we're referencing in here, configuration. And then we need a not service account, shared credentials. Essentially what I would need to do is create a copy of this. So what you would do is, and I can kind of help you get this set up. So where you already have this like Imperial API bot and then the password associated for it. We also need the URL for it. So you would need to get this like user's username and then password for the sandbox. And then we would need to put it in a separate credential, which I will do right here I'll get it set up for us. the TDX tickets. So essentially, whenever you are ready, just replace it with like just get the change the username and the password in here, and then it will work for you to be able to use this connector. And it's saying the error occurred, forbidden messages. It's because I didn't pass through the right values. Those values are not correct. That's why I was doing that. But then I can go back to this connector that we just did for that TDX ticket sandbox. And then I can swap around to say which connector or which credential it's actually using, which is going to be this one whenever it gets fixed.
Okay.
Yeah.
In the connector definitions,
Mhm.
I see that there's like, for example, TDX common, TDX project, TDX reports,
Mhm.
as connectors. Like
Mhm.
we can add those, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So for adding those connectors in the connector definitions, all you simply do is just go to add, and you have like standard right here. You just click on next, and then these are all your standard connectors that you have available to you that you can download and then use. So, I mean, you have a ton of stuff in here. And you can also create your own custom connectors too. So if you have like an internal API, you can create those as well.
Do you have any Power BI examples that are connectors? Someone that's using Power BI with Dynamic.
So I forget like what the Power BI like actions that you have at least readily available for you are. I don't remember if it's like if you can actually like update certain information with them or with it. These are all your standard actions right here that you have available for it. I can't think of anybody. Well, there's one client that I know who uses it, but we're not allowed to we have an agreement with them that we're not allowed to share what they use it specifically for, I believe. But that's what you have available to you for it. Any other questions? Not then. I will see you all, I believe, next. Gotta double check the calendar. When are we meeting next? We are meeting on next Wednesday.
Okie dokie. Do you have any homework for us besides the credentials for the sandbox?
Going through those labs, that like just kind of going through that. And
Yeah.
also, I mean, the biggest thing, even if you don't even go through the labs, what I want you to do is at least get in there and start trying to just build something. The easy, and I hate saying this, and I hate when people tell this to me too. The easiest way to learn iPass is to make mistakes and then figure out why you made the mistake. Kind of like programming. It's like, it's like, oh, there was a space. That's what was messing it up. You got to look for your spaces in iPass. So, but yeah, just like going in and like, I mean, one of the biggest things too is like coming into the global community library and then like downloading certain flows. Like I'll pull out this one to add all people its attributes just because it's one that I made. If I import this, then like you can come in here and actually see like this is everything that I did for this flow. And then you can see like all the comments that I add and then how I do stuff associated throughout it. You get to see like people's pre-built flows for stuff. This is also really good learning because then, especially when it's really well commented, you can see like how people are actually doing logic for stuff.
Yes, it's very helpful.
Yeah. So I mean that, like I said, that's probably the biggest thing I would recommend is just build stuff.
Once we get the sandbox up.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
definitely. So yeah. Any questions though? Any other questions?
I'm good.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Awesome. Well, then in that case, hope you all have a wonderful weekend and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andre.
Thank
And if
you.
you could send out the
You too.
recording from
Yeah, definitely.
yesterday as well as today, awesome. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Have a good one.
Bye.